home. Many, including myself over the years, have taken such a hearty comfort for granted, one that through the thickest of disparity will heal the day's troubles as you rest in for the night. Though it has been for what seems quite some time, I can still feel it, simply as if it were waved at me like I were a dog, mere moments from my desperate grasp. My jaws hungered for the slightest morsel, but alas, it is not mine to possess. Though I may not have lived in lush regality, nor pampered by highbrow company, I wouldn't trade the life that I had for all the riches in the world. My family was rather moderate in size, not too full or too small to be exact. My father owned a bakery, which had gained quite the loyal following in that of the small farm town of Terenzian, where I only knew my mother for a short period. She left this world when I was just a little girl. Alongside me were my eldest sisters, Gwen and Matilda, who were most likely the two people I was closest to of all. They would tell me stories of mother, while also mostly aiding and raising me, teaching me to sing old hymns, to make baked delights, to run through the fields as doe frolic, and to howl with pride as the guardians of the moon sing to her beauty. I learned to live my life to the fullest from them, to avoid ever having the slightest regret. I am aware that the way that I behave seems very improper to some, but then again, not everyone can understand the pure taste of freedom. My father, on the other hand, I would describe as a very peculiar man. According to him, our family had been in the bakery business for generations. He was always a stubborn man who stuck to his views and tradition. When not having us make or sell bread at the rambunctious stands, he would often try and offer our hands in marriage to certain patrons. Seeing as we were in a farming town, it was not uncommon for adventurers and other travelers to browse our wares. We weren't strangers to townspeople. Back then I could probably tell you almost everyone's names and what their regular orders would be. Back then, we would have been one of the few to help provide catering for festivals. Considering we were a farming town, one can imagine how many traditions and trivial things that we would celebrate on such occasions. However, one particular festival held a special place in my heart, for I attended it with a certain local boy known as Rumem, or I called him Rue for short. He was a gentleman who worked with John up at the ranch. He was always so rather shy, modest, and quite sweet, and he was very honest. I remember some girls fawned mostly for the other rancher boys. However, I had my heart set on Rue. Despite my father always trying to betroth or promise me to richer folk with the world seemingly at their oysters, I couldn't help but keep going back to him. From his calming blue gaze, his tender smile, his golden locks, to his soft embrace despite his figure. Often when he wasn't working, he would visit and get some bread. Sometimes my sisters and I would drag him and the other rancher boys to the fields and the forest with us. Many lovely memories of those days would often bring a smile to my face now and then. I recall all the things from that lovely festival with him, and the lovely music, the gentle lights, and how, for a moment, I felt as though our hearts were entwined. In my eyes, I really had it all in Terenzian. A loving family, a job that I enjoyed, a man whom I loved. It was all perfect to me. So much so that I dared to, like most, hope for a happy ending, to one day marry Rue. Maybe travel a bit and then return to some bread making. Sounds odd, but this was my dream, my lovely tale, the perfect ending. However, I soon learned that not everyone gets what they desire, no matter how much praying or good karma they put into that of the beyond. Fate has a way of working like that, in a sense picking at random to change the lives of many within our lands. Like many, we all wished for that fabled happy ending we hear within the old years of youth, believing that it's possible for any and everyone. I too once believed this, but it was taken from me. My hope is now but a weak spider's thread, so desperate and weak that I would give anything just to experience what once was. From the brisk morning air, to laughter, to the beautiful landscapes, down to the simplest feeling of grass beneath one's toes. Just for one last taste, I would trade what I barely have left for just a taste. But alas, in the end, sometimes it's better to accept the ending that fate gives you. The festival was the most amazing experience I've ever had. For starters, it began the night before, when I was working up the courage to ask Rue to the festival. I was on my way to his house, and my internal monologue was like, "You can do this. You don't suck. He likes you. Oh, by the gods, he does like me, right? What if he thinks my ears are weird? I don't know how I could handle that if something were to..." As I was becoming lost in my head, I hadn't realized how far I had walked until I bumped directly into John, his father. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." "Looking for Rumem?" he replied, stifling a chuckle. "He's just round the back finishing up some chores." "Thank you," I said, practically peeing myself. With this, I gingerly walked to the back of the ranch house where my scrawny hunk of beauty was carrying a bucket of water to the cows. There was some sweat dripping down his brow while his long blonde hair was frazzled down the sides of his neck. He had this cute little nose, too. "Rumem, how are you?" "Oh, Edith, hey, it's nice to see you." "Oh, I'm exhausted." "Oh, yeah, I can tell. Well, you look good. I mean, you look tired." I stammered, potentially making this the most unnecessarily awkward exchange of events possible. "So, the festival's tomorrow?" "Yeah, it is," he said. "I was wondering if... Did you want to go to the festival with me tomorrow?" I interjected, biting my tongue and coming to terms with my death. He paused for a few seconds, blushing wildly. He attempted to hide it by smiling and looking at the moon. "Yeah, I'd love to." Over the next hour, we exchanged awkward small talk. When I eventually walked home, well, skipped rather. I walked for the first few minutes and then changed my outlook when I went over everything in my head. Then I skipped. The next morning, the townspeople were incredibly busy. Streamers were being hung up, produce was being moved, chores were being completed, and the fountain in the center of the town was being polished. Throughout the day, I assisted my father in baking different pastries and bread to hand out later in the day. My sisters teased me about Rue, but I didn't particularly care. At least I had a boyfriend. When night fell and the festival began, music blasted throughout the center of the town. Musicians poured their hearts out, playing lutes, flutes, violins, drums, and bagpipes. The way the torches glistened in Rue's eyes was something that I never wanted to forget. He often stared into my eyes before winking and walking off. I hated him. After a decent while of distributing sweet bread and cupcakes, my father said I could wander off and enjoy the festival. He handed me three whole pieces of gold and whispered, "This is your chance. Make something special out of this." So I walked off in search of Rumem. Eventually I found him by the fountain, watching the musicians play. "Lovely, aren't they?" I said, surprising him with a hug from behind. "Oh!" he laughed. "Yeah, here, I made this for you." Rumem handed me a small, carved piece of wood in the shape of a bear. This was genuinely the cutest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. My smile grew wide and I giggled. "I love it." My cheeks were glowing bright red as I stuffed it away into my light blue dress. The one that I chose for tonight had pockets, and I made sure everyone knew. Over the next couple hours, Rue and I enjoyed the various events of the festival, and I bought the biggest turkey leg that I have ever seen, and Rue looked at me in a way that I would never forget as I sunk my teeth into the leg, juices dripping down my face. Eventually, after my stomach hurt from laughing, we kissed. It wasn't one of the kisses in the love stories that I totally haven't read before, but it was one of those that made me swoon. Rumem had always been shy and a man of a few words, so when we were laying down outside of the town, we watched everything from a distance. Terenzian being a farm town directly east from one of the larger cities that I think in the world, Arginia, we produced a handful of the crops that went there. In this, there were always rolling hills and a tree outside of the town. That's where we were, underneath the tree, watching the stars. The time is approximately midnight, when the moon is vibrant and the stars shine green with spatial gases. Dogs bark off in the distance, and the local silence is comforting. I looked into his ocean blue eyes, or what I think the color of the ocean is like. I've never been there before. And I smiled. He looked back at me, and in one quick movement, He moved forward and kissed me on the lips. His lips were soft and dry, and I squeezed his rough, callous farm hands, and I think in that moment, that was the point in which my soul left my body. This is not the story of the festival, this is the story of how I died in that very moment. I had been murdered by a boy. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I'm going off tomorrow to Arginia to join the Civil War efforts against Mythal. With everything going on, I wanted to make something for myself." I started to tear up. I had known he was leaving to become a soldier. I just didn't know when. His father, John, had told me. I let out a long sigh, and I didn't reply. I will be back for you. I promise." I will never forget that kiss. Eventually, we went back into the main part of the town and met back up with my father. I didn't want to believe that this night would be the last time that we would see each other, but a part of me knew this and had to come to terms with it. This had been the latest either of us had stayed up beyond our normal bedtimes, and it was well into the late hours of the night. I gave Rue one more tight, aggressive hug that felt like it went on for an eternity. I wanted it to, anyway. He pet my head and kissed my forehead. "I promise," he said. "I will be back, and I will see you in the morning." I promise. When I went to bed, I think I cried for an hour, but eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, it was business as usual. The mess from the festival had to be cleaned up alongside my daily chores, so it was essentially like doing double chores for a night of fun. Honestly, though, it was totally worth it. When I went downstairs, my father was already awake. The smell of fresh flour filled the air permeating around our little bakery. "Ah, good morning, Edith. Could you head on over to the river and get me a bucket of water?" "Thanks, sweetie." The way he put it was as if I didn't have a choice, which I didn't, but if we were being totally honest, I didn't mind. My father was a wonderful man and took care of us. I went outside and grabbed the bucket next to our front door and made my way to the stream. I wondered where Rumem was, or when he was leaving. I wanted to say goodbye to him one last time. I was sure that he would have sought me out before leaving. When I reached the stream, the sound of running water was pleasant. The smell of flowers filled the air while I bent over to fill the bucket. It was at this moment that my heart dropped. I heard cackling and jittering around me. At first, I thought it was some of the children from the town attempting to pull a prank on me. I knew about the dangers around our town, but I never wanted to believe it. Our town had always been, in the past, our town had been burned to the ground by bandits many years ago. But these didn't sound like bandits. These sounded more like a hyena, and I didn't want to stay to find out. I finished filling my bucket, and when out of the tall grass lunged 5 of the tallest, most disgusting figures I have ever seen. They were 7 feet tall with matted, disgusting fur, the color of charcoal and ashes. These hyena creatures stood on 2 legs and had worn pieces of leather armor that was grimy and spiky in various locations. They had manes of yellow and red fur that trailed down their backs, while their sharp teeth gnashed towards me. Many of them had jagged, menacing spears and bows, while their mouths frothed and their eyes went wild. They detonated into cackling laughter and chippers. I swung the bucket towards them, splashing them with water as I attempted to sprint towards the town, towards anyone who could help me. In one quick movement, one of these creatures rushed up to me and bashed me above the eyebrow with a club of some sort. My vision went blurry as I became incredibly dizzy. I was attempting to scream, but I fell down to the ground and stumbled around. One of these creatures threw a burlap sack over my head and hit me once more, where I fell unconscious, praying for anyone to help me.